Hello, and may the 4th be with you. It's Star Wars Day, and not only that, but it's our very own Chewbacca's birthday. This is episode 15.
This is Partners in Crime with Adam Croft and Robert Dawes.
Happy birthday, Bob, first of all.
Well, thank you very much indeed. That's very kind of you. It was rather special day for me. It's starting very well, and I do enjoy a good birthday. I give it 100% of my attention, and fortunately my family and friends tend to do much the same, so I'm spoilt rotten.
Well, you should always start off every birthday with a podcast. Have you had a good week, though?
I've had a smashing week, thanks very much. Yes, It's been a very busy week. I've been travelling around. I was at a party in Yorkshire. I'll go into that in a little more detail later on. Over the weekend, the week before last, went to the Theakston's crime writing festival launch in London, the Harrogate Festival, which was opened by Lee Child, who is in charge of things this year, programming that is, and that was a smashing event. Met lots of crime writers, had a good old chat, a little sip of Prosecco in very smart and sleek surroundings, and had a very good time. And the festival was officially launched. Excellent. And all eyes on that for July, but more again on that later.
Okay. Well, I had an interesting week. Not crime related, this one, but I had a phone call on Monday night. I thought this was worth mentioning. It's made me laugh eventually. So from a landlord of a local pub, who said to me, he said, "Hello, Adam, it's Philip." I said, "Hello." He said, I hear you've agreed to take part in our charity marathon."
I said, sorry, that was a spontaneous guffaw. I'll control myself.
I said, I remember somebody mentioning it to me, and I said, I might be interested, but I didn't hear anything back. So I just said, I'm happy to do that, or, to take part. And he said, okay, great. He said, I'm sorting out all of the details. He said that your start time is 12:04. I said, okay. That's fine. I said, I'll meet you at the pub then. Can you just remind me the date of the marathon? He said, it's on Monday. And this was on this Monday just gone. So, hard in training I have not been. Fortunately, I don't have to do a full marathon. There's 26 of us running a mile, which is a good start.
That's not too bad. I mean, I thought the marathon you preferred was the one that actually slowly crawled from one pub to the other, starting off at 4 minutes past 12 and ending up at some hour considerably later in the day.
26 pubs in 3 hours.
Yeah, well, that's you get some sponsorship for that. Not that you'd be in any state to collect it.
Well, speaking of sponsorship, I thought if I'm going to kill myself, I might as well do it in style. It's for the Bedford and District Cerebral Palsy Society, is what the charity is, what the marathon is being done for. So I decided I was going to canvass some of my readers and try and raise some sponsorships. What I've done is I've got a new book coming out quite soon, in the next few weeks. So I am auctioning off, or raffling off, 2 character names in the book.
Yes.
So I've got a Just Giving page set up, and I'm going to put the link in the show notes for this episode as well. So you can, if you'd like to get involved, that would be absolutely lovely. And basically every pound that somebody donates gets them entrance into this raffle to have one of 2 characters named after them in the new book. And of course, all the money goes to the Bedford and District Cerebral Palsy Society. I turn up, do my 1 mile of the marathon in style, and hopefully raise lots of money for them and make myself look slightly less stupid in the interim.
Well, I think that's a very admirable thing to do, and if the 2 character names turn out to be Paula Radcliffe and Mo Farah, I must say some justice there. I still think that you should actually consider running a marathon,
a full one.
Yes, because I would certainly turn out with my scarf and rattle to support you on that. I'd stand there with water by the side, cheering you onwards.
Yes.
So anyway, well that's.
Well, I'll do it if you will.
You shouldn't have silence on podcasts. It unnerves people, air. But that's exactly the state you just put me in.
The emergency music almost kicked in there.
That was that is not never ever going to happen. I fear. The very thought of it sends me trembling. I am not designed for running at any great length. 100 metres I can probably just about do.
Given an hour.
I'm a speed merchant. He kids himself. Right.
Well, I'm panicking myself over a mile, so we'll see. If there's no episode next week, listeners, you'll know why. But in the news, something I saw, which I bookmarked and sent to myself, was this article I saw on BBC News. It's quite interesting. The headline is Jack the Ripper postcard sold for £22,000 at auction. BBC News write, a postcard believed to have been sent by Jack the Ripper warning of 2 murders has been sold at auction. The note, which was sent to Ealing Police Station, warns the killer's knife is still in good order. The card is dated 29th of October 1888, which was 11 days before Mary Kelly, believed to be Jack the Ripper's final victim, was murdered on the 9th of November. The 2.75 inch by 4.75 inch card sold for £22,000. Is that amazing, or is it grisly and disturbing?
Well, I think it's as usual. It's a bit of both. But I mean, I'm sick. But I mean, they don't even know who Jack the Ripper was. So how can they actually tell that was from him?
Well, it's definitely from the case.
Oh, it's from the case. I see. Same handwriting.
I mean, you've got the Dear Boss letters as well, which
I mean, say postcard. It hasn't got a picture on the front of it. I suppose this is
no
prior to
wish you were here.
Welcome to Bournemouth.
Yeah. That's it. Yeah, it's got a lady in a bathing costume on the front. No. Yeah, well, I suppose the Dear Boss letters, which are now accepted to be faked, faked at the time. I think that's the thing. They are definitely part of the case. So I mean, for example, you had the Peter Sutcliffe murders, the Geordie guy who rang in and led police the wrong way. I mean, those original recordings, would be worth money because they are a key part of the case, even though it wasn't from the actual person.
So whilst not proven to be actually from Jack the Ripper, of course, because it's part of the case, that's its provenance, I guess, that's where the collector's interest goes.
Well,
£22,000.
Yeah, well, they had an estimate of £600 to £900 prior to the sale.
Oh, that's
so somebody was obviously two people were obviously quite keen on getting their hands on that.
That would make an episode of Flog It.
Guess what I found in my attic.
Oh, well, how fascinating! Right, well, fine. Well, I don't. My recommendation for the week is the book that became a television series. Now, many of you may know the work of Caleb Carr. He wrote a book called The Alienist, which was first published in 1994. It was a major phenomenon and spent 6 months in the New York Times bestseller list and received critical acclaim and sold millions of copies and became a modern classic, which continues, some say, to be a touchstone of historical suspense fiction for readers everywhere. So that is available on Kobo, actually, the Alienist. So if you haven't read it, I read it a while back and thought it was absolutely fascinating. So I was particularly interested to find out that it had been turned into a television series on Netflix, where it is described as Sherlock meets Jack the Ripper with a touch of Hannibal Lecter, which is true.
He's appearing quite a lot on this podcast today, Jack the Ripper.
Jack the Ripper, yes.
I hope he's paying us for the sponsorship.
This hasn't worked out at all, as you can probably tell, listeners.
Very little has ever worked out in advance.
This is right off the hoof. So no, that's yes, I didn't spot that. Well done. I'm glad you're here. So yes,
I'm here to press the buttons mainly.
Oh, yeah, much more than that, but mostly to press the buttons. I have to say, I've seen the first episode, and it's quite an extraordinary piece of television. I'll be talking to our guest about this at some point, about television and investment, but Netflix certainly puts its money where its programmes are. It's quite extraordinary piece. It's set in New York City in 1896. Updating the Dickensian ambience of horse-drawn cabs and top hats, it says here, is the depiction of the early days of forensic science and psychological profiling. And it's got a great cast, a stunning CGI, I have to say, and I would recommend it wholeheartedly. I'll read what it says here in Wikipedia. The psychological thriller drama is set in 1896 when a series of gruesome murders of boy prostitutes has gripped New York City. Newly appointed police commissioner Teddy Roosevelt. Yes, he
Never
calls,
heard of him.
calls upon Dr. Laszlo Kreisler, a criminal psychologist, and newspaper illustrator John Moore to conduct the investigation in secret. Joining them in the probe is Sarah Howard, the headstrong secretary of the police commissioner, as well as the Jewish twin brothers Marcus and Lucius Isaacson, both detective sergeants in the NYPD. So that's the beginning of it, and it's quite a rich and gruesome combination of story, character, design, or whatever, but I can strongly recommend it. It certainly does what it says on the tin. That is The Alienist, and people may just say, why is it called The Alienist?
That was what I was going to ask.
Is that what you were going to ask?
Well,
I did actually find out that, of course, Alienist was the name given to psychiatrists, psychologists, or whatever, because those with mental health conditions were called aliens.
Well, that's nice.
And so people who studied them and tried to help them were called alienists. That's what I've heard. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. So that's where it's got its title from. The Alienist on Netflix. Catch it if you can. It's really rather good.
And the book is on Kobo.
And the book is available on Kobo,
Good.
as is the audio.
Well, if you haven't yet bought a book from Kobo, now's your chance. You can get hold of The Alienist if you like the sound of that, with 90% off, which you can only get as a listener to Partners in Crime, you lucky, lucky things. Head over to kobo.com, find The Alienist by Caleb Carr, and enter the promo code CRIME at the checkout, and the lovely folk at Kobo will give you 90% off. You don't need a special e-reader, although they are fantastic. I've got one myself. I can attest to that. You can download the free app for your mobile, for your tablet, or any other device you like. We got a couple of emails in this week from listeners, Bob.
Oh, do read on.
Post Books by the Beach, Judith Waterhouse sent us an email. She met us in Scarborough at Books by the Beach. Says, hello Bob and Adam, really enjoying the podcasts, especially the ones with the food critiques in. Hilarious.
Well, thank you very much. And on behalf of you, I'll thank you too.
Yes. Perhaps you could rename these Partners in Comedy and Crime. She says, I do so agree with Peter Guttridge that the personal touch is very important and means so much to the fans and readers. Lovely to see you again, Bob, and meet you and Adam and your beautiful son in Scarborough. Please keep the events in Yorkshire, preferably nearer Bradford.
That's very... What a lovely,
I don't think
what
there's
a
a
lovely
beach in
email.
Bradford,
Thank you
though.
very much.
And we also had an email from Rosemary Valdez across the pond in the US. She says, Dear Adam and Robert, let me say first of all, your podcast has opened the eyes of people across the pond in the US. We've learned so much about the UK writers in this genre, and we listen and are happily surprised. Anyway, is it possible to have an episode on Robert Dawes as well as yourself, how you both got started, etc.? This is something that a couple of people have asked for now, that we should interview each other.
Well, I know my mother wrote in to say that, but I mean, I discounted that straight away. What do you think?
Well, if we run out of guests, it's certainly a good option. I think we should look at it, definitely. We did do a video, actually, that's on YouTube. I think it's called Conversations in Crime with Adam Croft and Robert Dawes, if I remember rightly. It's one of my book launches a couple of years back.
That was a couple of years. Well, I wouldn't recommend watching that because we're 2 years further down the line. 2 years.
2 years more overweight. We probably look better on video then.
That's the point. But well, maybe we will. Maybe we'll make it a sort of a Christmas special or a Christmas unspecial.
It's 1 week where we forget to book a guest.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you very much for that, and thanks very much for your interest. It's not the idea of the podcast, but we're very happy to vamp till ready and fill that with little stories that we may have and tell you a bit more about ourselves. Thanks very much.
Well, she also says, is it possible to have Val McDermid? She sounds fascinating. We learned about her in the Peter James interview, as I know you're aware. Yes, Val McDermid is on our books. She is coming onto the show, but it will be later in the year because we're tying that in with a very exciting book launch of hers, which we want to speak to her about a little bit closer to the time. So that's the reason Val's not been on yet, but we are assured She will do.
Well,
she's told us she will do, so she better do now.
I
won't like her anymore.
She's a woman of her word, and a hugely busy one too. So we'll be delighted to have her as a guest later on in the year. I'm a huge fan of hers, as you know. So that will be a personal favourite of mine. But what am I saying? All our guests are favourites.
Absolutely, yes. If you want to get in touch with the show, to write us an email as Judith and Rosemary. I think that was their names. Am I right? I've closed my email out, Dan. Yes, Judith and Rosemary. That's not bad, is it? See, I've done this before.
That sounds like a crime-solving couple, isn't it? Sort of
like Rosemary and Thyme.
Rosemary and Thyme. Judith
that's
and Rosemary.
Been done.
Yes, it has.
Yes, if you want to email us to suggest a guest, or just to let us know how much you love us in general, that'd be lovely.
Or to tell us not to talk about ourselves in a special podcast, please do.
Yeah, put it to the vote. We're on hello@partnersincrime.online. We're on Twitter @CrimeFicPodcast, or we're on Facebook, facebook.com/PartnersInCrimePodcast. Now, we have a very special guest this week as well, don't we?
We certainly do. One of the country's finest screenwriters, a man of huge versatility, and he's going to be chatting to us about his experiences as the adapter of Wallander, the BBC's Wallander with Kenneth Branagh, and his other crime project, The Fear. He's written many other things besides that. I'll mention those a little later on, but we're delighted to have as our guest the phenomenally talented Mr. Richard Cottan.
Yes. Now, before that, have you been reading any crime books this week at all?
I have been reading crime books. I've been actually going back to doing to reading some Father Browns, which I gained great solace from.
Should we do the little spoiler related to that?
Yes. Well, we are hoping to have a little visit to the Father Brown. Well, not exactly the set, but I'm meeting Mark Williams, who plays Father Brown, and a few other friends on that show to do an outside broadcast in the next few weeks. So that's after Aberdeen and after Scarborough. Our next little trot into the wilds of criminal fiction is going to be in the Cotswolds. So,
Father Brown special on the set.
A little Father Brown special. So basically, I've been genning up on that this week.
Absolutely, yeah. I can't wait for that. That's going to be fantastic. Actually, having an outside broadcast on the set of Father Brown with Father Brown.
I think, but it's sort of on the location really, because it's mostly filmed on location. There's a lot of dramas are these days. So yes, they still remain sets. I don't know whether I'll be allowed on the set because, of course, I'm not actively working on it. But I will be grabbing them at the unit base,
lurking around in the background.
Yes, and just waiting for the moment the dog collar's slipped off and a bacon sandwich is on its way to Mark, and I'll intervene then. But anyway, we've been chatting, and he's delighted to turn up and have a chat about the huge success of the BBC's Father Brown and his part in that. That's Mark Williams' Father Brown special coming shortly.
Well, again, we've mentioned it now, so they have to do it. That's Mark Williams and Val McDermid with Upset already, and we're only 18 minutes in. So
we may still be stuck with just talking about ourselves for an entire episode. So let's.
Well, that's it. We've got that in the bag, haven't we? As a backup.
Val and Mark couldn't make it. It's just us. Now, our very special guest today is one of the country's, the UK's, most versatile and finest screenwriters, whose work over the years is quite extraordinary. Just to mention a few, he has written screenplays to Larkin, Love Again with Hugh Bonville, Colditz with Damien Lewis, Hancock and Joan, a firm favourite of mine, plus Margaret. Many of you will probably remember a splendid film starring Lindsay Duncan, and many others. He is here today to be interrogated about his crime fiction writing adaptation, both the adaptation of the Wallander books and also his own series, The Fear, which many of you will remember. It was a firm favourite of mine, garnered a lot of praise, and looked into the world, the underworld, criminal underworld in Brighton to great effect. So it's a great pleasure to welcome to Partners in Crime Mr. Richard Cottan. Hello, Rick, how are you?
Hello, Bob. Very well, thank you.
Now, I must point out that the two of us were together over the weekend at a party in Hebden Bridge, celebrating a friend's 50th birthday. We had rather a good time, didn't we?
We did. We had a great time, yeah.
It was very. It was a great. I thought it was a very good disco, playing.
I think disco's the word, isn't it, Bob?
Well, that's put me firmly in the 70s. I mean, and the music was very much to my taste, harking back to my teenage years.
Please tell me you danced.
No, I was just about to say there wasn't a great deal of movement. Not a great deal of movement on your part, Bob.
Did you get a foot tapping?
Not even a tapped foot.
We did still hug that dark corner.
We did. We huddled together and watched and listened and chatted and laughed and imbibed. And it was very. I didn't see much else of Hebden Bridge, it has to be said. But,
no, neither did we. Only by accident.
So we had just a splendid time, and it's one of the reasons why I threatened you with this interview. And thank you very much for coming on today to talk to us. Well, first of all, I'm going to talk about Wallander. I mean, this is you got a BAFTA for this series, 1 and 2, a huge success. So what were your first thoughts when you were approached to adapt the Henning Mankell detective?
Well, I'd never done a detective before. I'd never even considered doing a detective. And Left Bank had the rights to it. And the producer, Francis Hopkinson, had said to them, why don't we try and get someone who doesn't normally do this kind of thing? That might be quite interesting, given the nature of the books and the character. And he approached me, and I said no, that I didn't fancy it at all. And then he told me that Kenneth Branagh was in the frame, and that, were we to get a script that was any good, then Ken might well do it. And I thought, well, that's such an opportunity. And then I read the books. I read a couple of the books and absolutely fell for the character. I think it was such a wonderful character. And also, I think more importantly, I thought, I think I can write this character. I think I get it. All that sort of slightly lugubrious, seedy melancholy. And I thought, yeah, I could do this. And so that's how it came about.
Well, that's wonderful, because it's sort of, obviously, it was up and running in a Swedish version with Christer Henriksson playing a Wallander. So it had actually been out there. So this was clearly the English translation of it. So, I mean, the gauntlet's
But nobody thought we could do it. Everyone kept saying...
Really?
Oh, yeah, they'd had it around. They pitched it to ITV and various people. And they'd all come back, the wonderful imagination of the commissioning editor. They'd all come back and said, but it's set in Sweden. How are you going to do that? Are they all going to have accents? Are they going to speak fnurdy-fnur? And they were going, no, it'd just be normal. Why can't we just do it normally? They went, no chance. As soon as Ken showed his face and said, I want to do this script, they were all going, oh, what a great idea. Yeah, it's a fantastic idea. Of course it's going to work. And so there was a kind of complete about turn. So the Swedish Wallander didn't really have much bearing on whether or not we got it made. In fact, I'm pretty certain the Swedish Wallander hadn't come out in this country.
Oh, that's interesting. When it was such a success over here, they decided to bring it out probably on BBC Four. I would.
Yeah, no, there was, and there was no Scandi. When we kicked off, there was absolutely no Scandi stuff at all in this country, and so. I mean, to give commissioning editors their due, there had been nothing from Scandinavia at all. And so it was a bit of a punt. And it basically did all hang on Ken doing it.
Well, that's interesting, because I can remember at the time, and we're talking 10 years ago now, that a couple of friends of mine had been approached loosely to whether they were going to be interested in it, which is what very often happens, isn't it, in the early days of the project. They approach actors to see whether they're interested in principle, and I can remember waiting for weeks on end for the phone call to me, but it never arrived.
The glamorous assistant had already been cast.
And then the news was that Ken Branagh was going to do it, and it was great, and everyone was justifiably, as it turned out, hugely excited about it. Now, I was reading about this, that Ken and the director, Philip Martin, I think, was directing the first one. They didn't look at any of the previous incarnation with Krista Henriksson and the cinema version, precisely because they didn't want to be influenced by what had been done before. Did the same rule apply to you? Did you look at any of the Swedish television?
No, I didn't. But I tell you what, we went on a recce and to Sweden, and a sort of bunch of us with Ken. It was one of the first times I'd met him, and Ken and his sort of new wife and the producers. And what they did was they also, at the same time as commissioning me to write an episode, they commissioned another writer, which they didn't tell me, to write another episode. And then I realised that somehow we were in some kind of contest.
Oh.
And so there was me and this other writer going around southern Sweden in a van with Ken and the producer. And the other writer was absolutely full of it. And he kept saying, we'd arrive at a location, he'd say, "Oh, this is wonderful for me. Oh, yes, this is where I can interview the pregnant woman. Wonderful for me." And then he'd turn to me and go, "Any good for you?" I was thinking, I don't even know what the plot is. I've got no idea. Absolutely no idea. So anyway, we did all this all around Sweden. We were doing this. And we arrived back at there's a sort of studio. They built a studio for to shoot the Swedish Wallanders in the town that Henning Mankell set it. And so we were back there, and there was a souvenir shop, merchandise shop. And we were wandering around. Everybody else was being terribly snooty. "Oh, look at these ridiculous T-shirts." And I found in the back of there was all these DVDs of previous versions of the Wallander. Oh. And it wasn't the television one. They'd made. They've done hundreds of them over there. They've made 4 with a big Swedish actor whose name I forget. And it was the one I was doing. And I took it out. I thought, "Oh, I'll have a look at this," and got a T-shirt, wrapped it in it, and took it to the the checkout. Bought this thing and smuggled it in, and I never watched it. I got home and I put it in. I thought, it's all in Swedish. This is no good to me. I've never actually watched it, and to this day, I have never watched it. But I was in such a panic when I was out there, and this other writer spieling off about how much work he'd done and how he'd sorted the whole thing out, that I thought, I'm going to have to have a look. I'm going to have to cheat. I'm going to have a look and see how you do this. But I never got round to. I've still got it somewhere. I never got round to watching.
Well, it's wonderfully honest of you, but how irritating to suddenly this happens in the industry all the time. You suddenly think that you're playing on a level playing field, and all of a sudden, you find, like, wait a minute, this isn't what I thought it was.
Absolutely right.
But they made the right decision in the end, didn't they?
Well, I don't know. I mean, he kept saying, as we were going around Sweden, he kept saying, "No, I think mine must be first." I mean, clearly, my story, I think mine must be first. And I kind of was getting a bit grumpy and thinking, "Oh, well, who cares, whatever." Yeah. And then what happened was, I did it. And I think partly because this was a guy who'd done loads and loads of detective adaptations. And I think because I hadn't made a very good fist of the detective bit of it. But what I'd managed to do is write like a film, like a sort of, it was almost like a US road trip thing of the detective going through and all sorts of strange things happening. And Ken really went for that. He just happened to go for that. He went, that's what I read in the book. That's my feeling. You've got my feeling. The other guy had sorted the plot out way, way better than me. He'd worked out his plot and everything. But Ken just responded to what I'd written in terms of the character.
Well, now that's interesting because you have a background, I know, as an actor through training or whatever. So those instincts are very much alive in you and translated clearly into your work. Do you think there's something that other actors can find in your writing, a sort of muscularity, a sort of something that you can, as you just said with Ken, I see the way in and I see the way into the character, and that's what I'm interested in. Do you think those particular muscles learned at an early age help you as well?
Yeah, I think that I think, yeah, definitely. I think that in it's a massive generalisation, but I think that actors who write, as a rule, well, you know this as well as I do, actors who write tend to write much better dialogue, and they tend to write better scenes. They have much more of a sense of what you can get from a scene. But what they're not great at, again, this is a generalisation, they're not great at the overall plot. It's not a strong point.
Yes.
Because, as we know, most of the time actors don't actually read the bits they're not in. So
Well,
they've got no idea what happens in the rest of it.
I don't. I rarely read the bits I am in.
I know. Well, you hear the play over the tannoy, and I've seen actors go, "Oh my God, that's what happens, is it?" But so I think that actors do tend to respond to my stuff because they can. I write good parts. I mean,
Yes.
That's about the only thing I will blow my trumpet for. I do write good parts.
Well,
they don't often make sense.
Well, you
but
certainly do.
Actors kind of go, "I want to do this."
Rick, in adapting books for TV, I mean, something else that is very, very important is capturing the essence of the books.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's something that you do absolutely perfectly with the Wallander books. What do you think that unique essence of Wallander is that you managed to capture?
Well, I don't think that's I mean, that's partly me. I did write about it, but that is so much down to Philip, who set the tone for them, and particularly they managed to get a cinematographer who's an Oscar-winning cinematographer called Anthony Dodd Mantle, who normally does these massive, great movies. Mm. And I think his wife was Swedish or something, and he needed to be in the country, and so he agreed to do it. And between him and Philip, they absolutely put the stamp on it. I'd written it in a way that clearly wasn't going bang, bang, bang. I'd written it in a way that sort of had a sense of as I said earlier, with the particular one I did first, of the character sort of moving through the landscape. But they had taken that and moved it onto a completely different level. I mean, the two of them, plus Ken, the two of them really, that they made it, they gave it that. I always thought. But I didn't think they were ever quite as good as it wore on, and though people dropped away from the series, it never quite, I didn't think it ever recreated the atmosphere of the first couple of series. I think Philip.
Was Henning Mankell around during filming, or was he?
No, he wasn't at all.
Did he leave you to get on with it? And
no, I met him once outside a hotel. He was very nice, charming, very sort of complimentary about it. He said an interesting thing actually. He said the Swedish version is about a detective. He said your version is about a man. And I thought that was I thought, wow, that's exactly what I tried to do. I was much more interested in the man than I was in the detective. I was much more interested in the effect that the crimes were having on this man, and clearly his kind of midlife crisis, than I was in the beats of the detective stuff.
Well, you did it so wonderfully well. I mean, I was chatting to you on Saturday, and I was saying how particularly affecting I found the characterization of Wallander in Branagh's interpretation and of your adaptation. And one particular plot as well was of Pavel Wallander, his father, with his Alzheimer's. And this is sort of an area that you don't necessarily associate with a murder investigation or plot or whatever, and yet there it was, an absolute part of this man's life. He's trying to track down murderers on one side and deal with the other tragedies in his personal life and that of his father in particular. I thought that was beautifully handled, one of the most beautifully written accounts of Alzheimer's I've seen on screen. Did you find that a particular challenge?
Yeah, that was quite difficult. But I as I said to you on over the weekend, those two actors together on screen was so brilliant.
David Warner playing Paul,
yeah, David Warner and Ken were just. I mean, they really are. They are class, aren't they?
They're lions, are they not?
Yeah. And my God, they really do kind of run at each other when they're both on set. But so yeah, it was. I mean, the writing of it was hard because it was always very hard it was very hard to squeeze it in without making it look like it was squeezed in. It was very difficult to make it an integral part of Wallander's journey each time it appeared. And but I was always very, very pleased with, and Ken and David were so good in the it was the last one I did, which was the 6th episode where basically the father dies.
Yes.
And I thought that they both did that absolutely wonderfully.
Well, I mean, it does, stand out, and it's so well loved. And it's quite interesting because at the time I can remember people saying, "Oh, well, I like the Swedish version," although it hadn't been seen over here. There'd been certainly in crime lovers circles who were onto this sort of thing. And over the years, of course, they've been playing both side by side on television at times. And people say, well, I prefer this one, or I prefer that one. But I agree with my parents, actually, Janet and Clem, who loved both and found them both so very different. Now, sorry to compare and contrast, but I believe that the Swedish one adapted one book and then worked off of storylines that Henning Mankell had given them, whereas your series, the Branagh series, took mostly from the novels that are published. I think your first one was Sidetracked. That's the first episode, isn't it? That was the first book chosen.
That's right. That's interesting. That was the book that the other guy had written, and I then, once they'd established that I was doing it, I then had to do my own version of that. But yeah, Sidetrack was the first. The first one I wrote was the 3rd one of the first series, which was One Step Behind. I was always ready for that. That was the first one I did. Yeah.
Now,
and then we did. Go on.
No, after you, please.
No, I was going to say we did the books. I stopped after 6, and those books were okay. And then when they carried on with it, they did another 6. They were getting into some dodgy books. Right. There was one about South Africa and all sorts of things.
Yes,
and then what they did was Sorry?
I remember that one. Yes, I remember that one. And, not me to criticise, but that was the one that I thought didn't work for me. Really, I put it down at the time to certain issues that were in the book, but also I was missing South Sweden. It was so much a part.
Well, that was my point. They asked me. This is getting a little bit indiscreet, but they kept asking me to do more. They asked me to do that one, and I said to the producer, "You can't do this. It's ridiculous. The whole point is the landscape. The whole point of the Wallander is that he is part of his landscape. That sort of makes him what he is. And if you stick him in South Africa, it's completely meaningless. He just becomes another detective." And also, the other thing that irritated me was, I said, so what accent's he going to have? Well, what does it matter? Well, of course it matters, because we've got him speaking perfectly normal English, and we all assume and we buy into the fact that actually he's speaking Swedish. If he goes to South Africa and he speaks perfectly normal English, and they're all speaking English back to him in a South African accent,
the convention.
That doesn't add up. Yeah, it's totally broken the convention. Yeah, I couldn't see the point of it at all.
Well, I mean, that could be continued for some time, that conversation. But I mean, it's welcome to Hello. I think it's now in the second series you donned an executive producer's hat as well. Did that affect? Did you find that an interesting and happy challenge?
Yeah, I mean, I did.
I'm sure you weren't out there cracking the whip every day, but
no. To be honest with you, and this is not a particularly exalted answer to your question. I didn't really want to do anymore. I'd done 3, and I thought, oh, that's it for me. And so I think that what happened was Ken said to the producers, look, come on, loves, offer him the exec producing thing. It'll get him. He'll do it. So, of course, they said, you can be exec producer. And I went, oh, all right, I'll do it then. But it didn't actually mean I did anything. So they sent me audition tapes. But if I said anything, they just completely ignored them.
Did you have to turn up more? And did your name on the back of a seat? Ooh, you would have had that anyway, I'm sure. But
No. As you well know. No, I didn't. No, I still turned up for my set visit and bumped into things, and everyone said, who's that guy with the glasses? I mean, it's the usual stuff being the writer.
The writer's
Nobody's
life.
got any idea who you are.
Who is he? Chuck him off the set immediately.
It did, doesn't it? And the writer always walks through shot at some point.
Yeah. So you didn't make a guest appearance in Wallander in the Hitchcockian way, or the Colin Dexter way.
No.
Okay, so we Wallander, huge success, BAFTA on the mantelpiece, all going splendidly well, and then you actually set about bringing out your own idea, The Fear. I think it's a brilliant British crime series set in Brighton. Can you tell us a bit how you got into that particular story?
Yeah, I was brought an idea which was about a gangster with Alzheimer's. And there was also the complications about him, undercover police and all the rest of it. And I didn't really want to do that, but I said to them, this idea of a kind of crime lord, as it were, with Alzheimer's, I find really interesting. And then what I did was, maybe foolishly ambitious. What I tried to do was, Channel 4 called it the portrait of a criminal mind or something. My idea was that it was the portrait of a disease, but of course that's not going to sell quite as well. So my idea was that the whole thing took place in this man's head, and that everything that was happening in the plot, all the gangsters, all the rest of it, were actually an embodiment of Alzheimer's moving into this man's head. And the effect that it had on his family was like the effect that the disease has on those around someone who's beginning to suffer. And what's happening to him is that he's starting to get all sorts of flashbacks and things from his past as his brain gradually starts to disintegrate. That was the thing I tried to do with it. Not altogether successfully, it has to be said.
You
because
say
what
that
happened is
I would disagree from this particular viewers. I mean, again, that's why I asked the question, brought up your previous dealing with Alzheimer's, because I think you continued that into this work with huge effect. I found it incredibly, just terrific drama. And in Peter Mullen's hand, they had to play the parts. I mean, superbly done. But you weren't happy. Why? You weren't particularly happy.
Well, I think it was a difficult thing to make work, and I think that it's very hard sometimes because you get all sorts of people telling you to be more bold, and then they tell you not to be so bold. And I think what I ended up with, I probably should have forced through something that was even bolder than it ended up being. Because what happened was that people watched it and they said, "Oh, it's a crime drama. Peter Mullen's very good. And why are all the gangsters Albanians? This is slightly racist. And why are they all dressed in black?" And I kept. I tell you what happened was, I was walking along the front. This was months after the series had gone out, and I was walking along the front in Brighton, because as you know, it's where my partner lives. And I was walking on the front in the sunshine, and I walked just past where we set a lot of it by the old crumbling West Pier, and two guys were talking, and I heard one of them say to the other, "Yeah, they shot this gangster thing down here. They shot a lot of it here." And he went, "Oh, right, was it any good?" The other guy said, "Yeah, it wasn't bad at all." And I so wanted to lean in and say, the Albanian gangsters were a metaphor. Just need to point that out. But I thought, no, I won't do that. Because I had mixed feelings about it, yeah. But I wanted it to be. Anyway, there we go.
Well, that thing, but it's a sort of that sort of King Lear sort of thing, that someone losing with all his power. Some would say that maybe that's happening in America at this moment in time. Also, this idea that people begin to lose their faculties, and the empire they have built, and the position and the responsibilities that they have, everything starts to crumble around them.
Well, interesting. The Americans have bought it. They're going to turn it into a film, so we'll see.
Well, I'm not at all surprised. I really. So Brighton. Now talking to Ellie Griffith just the other day, and Peter James, both top crime novelists who set series of books in Brighton. Peter's in the contemporary modern day, and Ellie has got this wonderful series set in the 1950s in Brighton. And of course, Graham Greene had a similar idea in the 1940s, of course, with Brighton Rock. I mean, Brighton is very popular to set crime series. I mean, what is it about that particular city that actually drew you, and why do you think it is so popular for these books and dramas about the underworld?
Well, I think partly because it's the Graham Greene thing, isn't it? I mean, it's such an extraordinary resonance. But I think the reason that he would have gone down there is because there was a kind of overspill of the London gangs, wasn't there, down into Brighton? Yes. There was lots and lots of stuff about the horses, the racetrack. There's all sorts of rumours about money being buried and murders up on Race Hill. And I think that probably there's this sort of, it's not London, but it's got the seediness, and it's got the proximity to London, and it has this extraordinarily sort of beautiful, slightly crumbling facade, and you know that beneath that, God knows what's going on underneath that. There's something very attractive about that, I think, and that's what it was for me. There was all sorts of talk about, let's set it in Manchester, set it in Newcastle, and then because I was with Philippa down there, I was walking around one day and I just thought, this is ridiculous. This is where we should set it. Brighton is absolutely perfect. In fact, all those old buildings crumbling, again, it's like his mind. They were all sort of, the whole thing was just a sort of...
Oh, I mean, from a visual point of view, I mean, it was, that West Pier alone is quite extraordinary. But that's fascinating. Would you be tempted to adapt crime novels again? Do you think? Did all your experience in the genre generating your own stories, which, let's face it, is no mean feat in this day and age to take your own story and get it actually made. But would you be drawn to a crime fiction again as a writer? Yes. I mean, I think that you don't have, as you know, in this job, you don't really have a lot of choice, and I've avoided it. And it hasn't proved that successful for me because there's so much of it out there now on the screen. There's so much of it on the screen. Yes.
And it tends to be like a Trojan horse. If you want to say something, you often have now to Trojan horse it through some sort of genre piece.
Oh, that's
and so I mean, I can't. You guys you can work out those plots. I'm reading one at the moment. I think I told you at the weekend that a producer sent me another detective, and I'm just reading it at the moment. And I just think the plots, God, I mean, it's genius. I find that really, really hard.
Well, and also, a novel plot does not necessarily translate very well to the screen, which is the essence of it. I mean, this is where your particular, genius has to come into play. You just say, well, yes, that works on the page, and for a reader, but that just won't translate at all to the screen.
Well, that's not. Yeah, I mean, that's not just crime novels. My experience. Adaptation is that goes right across the board. The minute you start to pull a plot apart, they just don't work. They just do not work. You cannot put them on screen. They don't work. You just have to. How you're translating into a different form. There seems to be some weird different part of the brain that when you're reading something, you make up, and somehow your brain sort of cushions it all. It makes it make sense. It rationalizes ridiculous choices. You stick them up on the screen and absolutely no chance. So you do have to. I mean, the Wallanders were extraordinarily baroque plots.
Yes,
they didn't remotely work.
Oh, that's
didn't much work when I fixed them.
Yeah,
well, it is.
I beg to differ, and most of our listeners, I'm sure, have seen would do. But would it work? One last question, maybe, I think, is would it work? Does it work the other way? Because it struck me with the fear. Obviously it's heading towards hopefully a movie life, but would that work in a novel form? It's all there.
Wait, do you know? I've never thought of that, Bob. But I think that's really perceptive, because I think that's right. I think that is a particular story that would probably work better.
Yes, I do.
Because it's an internal. What I was trying to do was something internal. I was trying to dramatise something internal, and I found, and clearly, it was very difficult. Whereas actually, as a novel, you could probably do that better. Yeah.
Well, maybe
I think that's very astute.
We can coax you over to the other side.
I can hear Microsoft Word being opened from here.
Oh no, I wouldn't go that far.
Rick, I tell you what, it's been such a joy. Carry on from Saturday night. We're having all that was missing was a nice glass of Sauvignon, and it would be a recreation of the weekend. You've been such a smashing guest, as I knew you would be. Fascinating insights into the work of one of our best screenwriters, and maybe shortly to be a crime fiction novelist too, if I have my way. Thank you so much for joining us on Partners in Crime, and maybe we can chat to you next. I know you've got all sorts of things lined up. Your development slate is a heavy bag of extraordinary things, none of which I can mention, but I know most of them, and they're all incredibly exciting. So it won't be long before we'll be seeing you again. But for all listeners who haven't seen Wallander, certainly Series 1 and 2, and have not seen The Fear, they are available and out there, so go and watch them. You won't be disappointed. The screenplays by Richard Cottan. Richard, thanks very much from both of us for joining us.
Thank you both. It's been a pleasure. Thanks.
Well, from one special guest to another, there's maybe the listeners can hear in the background now that we've finished the interview with Rick. The rain here at Croft Towers is hammering down on the window outside.
Ah, yes, there we are.
It's
in the middle of another wonderful English winter.
Yes, April showers. Well, that's not really a shower. It's an absolute downpour. So anyway, setting the scene for you. You might be able to hear it in the background. We're talking about Wallander, weren't we, and how how it's so evocative of South Sweden, and now you hear the rain pounding down, and everyone can rightly believe they're in Bedfordshire.
Yes, which of course, as everyone knows, has great similarities to southern Sweden.
Yes, except
in their dreams.
Except we drink more. Well, it was fascinating speaking to Rick.
You know, I mean, he's an extraordinary man and hugely talented. I've got so much respect for him. I'm sure that was clear. You know, it's good screenwriters are few and far between, and he's one of the best. And hugely entertaining, a great insight into the life of someone who's working on crime fiction from a different perspective. I mean, very often, you know, we are talking to writers who create these characters and their stories, and so it's always interesting to find someone who actually takes that basic story and actually moves it into another medium, especially when it's done as successfully as Rick and Ken Branagh and Philip Martin did in Wallander.
That's why I always find it so fascinating when we talk to people who adapt books for TV and people who work on the TV side of things on this show, is because that's not a circle that I move in. You know, I don't know about adapting things for TV or what goes on the set and what have you. So it's really interesting for me just to kind of hear that side of crime.
Well, it is, you know, it can be a very torturous route because, of course, as a crime writer, you know, it's you working alone for the most part until you get to send the first draft to your editor and your publisher, where it becomes a bit more of a team effort, or certainly open to suggestions. Collaboration, though, is far less than it is in the medium of cinema, television, and indeed radio. So very often, as we've mentioned before on the podcast, a writer tends to give their work over to other people and have no idea really what's going on, apart from the occasional courtesy call and some idea of the finished product. And along the way, you do hear some horror stories, but you know,
but it's better than having to actually work with people. which sounds horrendous. So,
well,
yeah.
we come from different disciplines there, Thea and I. You work with yourself all the time, and as an actor for most of my life, it's been far from a solo thing. It's a collaboration from the minute you turn up at the first read through. So yeah, very different ways of working, but great insights there from Richard Cottan, and I'd love to have him back on the show again because I know he has many other stories to tell.
Well, if that's got you in the crime mood, then don't forget you can get 90% off your first ebook at Kobo by going to kobo.com and entering the promo code CRIME at the checkout. Right, well, as the heavens open and the rain lashes down on us here, I think I'm going to go and get my washing in.
Oh, well, I think I'll make myself a nice cup of coffee and watch you do that.
Partners in Crime was presented by Adam Croft and Robert Dawes and produced by Adam Croft. The theme tune was by the Caesareans. The Partners in Crime logo and imagery were designed by Stuart Beisch. Partners in Crime is sponsored by Kobo, your favourite local bookshop, perfected.